Ray Chapman's death in 1920 remains baseball's darkest moment. On August 16th, Cleveland Indians shortstop Ray Chapman stepped to the plate at New York's Polo Grounds to face Yankees pitcher Carl Mays. Mays threw with an unusual submarine delivery, and it was late afternoon with harsh shadows making the ball difficult to track. Chapman crowded the plate, a habit that would prove fatal. On a 1-1 count, Mays fired a high inside fastball that struck Chapman directly in the left temple. The sound was so explosive that Mays thought the ball had hit Chapman's bat and fielded it, throwing to first base. Chapman tried to walk off but collapsed at second base. Blood poured from his left ear. Rushed to St. Lawrence Hospital, surgeons performed emergency cranial surgery to relieve brain swelling, but Chapman died at 4:40 a.m. the next morning. His pregnant wife Katie arrived hours after his death and fainted upon hearing the news. He remains the only player killed by an on-field injury in Major League Baseball history, Tony Saunders. Tony Saunders experienced one of the most horrifying injuries ever witnessed on a mound. On May 26, 1999, the Tampa Bay Devil Rays pitcher delivered a 3-2 pitch against the Texas Rangers when his left humerus bone snapped completely mid-throw. The spiral fracture was so severe that his arm went completely limp, dangling unnaturally as he collapsed in agony. Witnesses described hearing an audible crack from the stands. After a year of grueling rehabilitation, Saunders attempted a comeback. Incredibly, on August 24, 2000, during his fifth minor league rehab start, his arm broke again in almost the exact same location while throwing another pitch. Doctors were completely baffled by the second fracture. The bones simply could not withstand the torque and force of pitching. The second break ended his career immediately at age 26, leaving medical professionals mystified about why his humerus failed twice. Dave Dravecky. Dave Dravecky's comeback story turned into pure nightmare fuel. After battling cancer that required removal of half his left deltoid muscle and a tumor from his pitching arm, Dravecky miraculously returned to the mound in August 1989. 5 days after his inspiring return, on August 15th in Montreal, Dravecky wound up to pitch to Tim Raines when his humerus bone suddenly exploded. Witnesses described the sound as resembling a gunshot or a bat cracking. Television cameras captured the horrifying moment as Dravecky's arm twisted grotesquely and he crumpled to the ground, screaming in unbearable pain. The cancer-weakened bone had simply shattered under the stress. As teammates and opponents rushed to his aid, Dravecky writhed on the mound, clutching his mangled arm. Tragically, the cancer returned aggressively, and Dravecky eventually had his entire left arm and shoulder amputated in 1991 to save his life. Giancarlo Stanton. Giancarlo Stanton's face became a gruesome canvas of destruction. On September 11, 2014, the Miami Marlins star stepped into the batter's box against Milwaukee Brewers pitcher Mike Fears. An 88-mile-per-hour fastball sailed directly into Stanton's face, striking him just below his left eye with devastating force. Stanton immediately crumpled to the ground as blood began pouring from multiple facial wounds. The damage was catastrophic. Multiple fractures to his maxilla and orbital bones, extensive dental trauma requiring reconstruction, and a facial laceration so severe it required numerous stitches. The batter's box looked like a crime scene, covered in so much blood that grounds crew workers had to physically scrape it off the dirt before play could resume. Stanton was stretchered off as teammates stood in stunned horror. Remarkably, he returned to play just 3 weeks later wearing protective face gear. Brandon McCarthy. Brandon McCarthy nearly died on a baseball field. On September 5, 2012, the Oakland A's pitcher was facing the Angels when Eric Ibar lined a ball directly into the right side of McCarthy's skull. The impact was devastating. McCarthy walked off the field under his own power, but within hours his condition deteriorated catastrophically. He had suffered an epidural hemorrhage, brain contusion, and skull fracture. Emergency neurosurgeons performed a 2-hour operation to relieve the massive pressure building inside his skull by removing a portion of bone. Doctors stated that without immediate surgery, McCarthy would have died within hours. The life-threatening nature of the injury shocked the baseball world. McCarthy's wife later tweeted that her husband's skull had a golf ball-sized piece removed. Miraculously, McCarthy eventually returned to pitching, though he required a specially designed protective cap and lived with permanent reminders of how close death came. Herb Score. Herb Score's career disintegrated in an instant. On May 7, 1957, the Cleveland Indians' young pitching phenom faced the New York Yankees at Cleveland Stadium. Score was one of baseball's brightest stars, a dominant left-hander with a devastating fastball. Gil McDougald stepped to the plate and lined a vicious shot directly back at Score. The ball struck Score's right eye with horrific force, shattering the orbital bones surrounding his eye, breaking his nose, and causing immediate massive hemorrhaging. Score collapsed instantly, his face a mask of blood. Teammates turned away, unable to look at the gruesome damage. The sound of ball hitting bone echoed throughout the stadium. Score was rushed to the hospital where doctors worked frantically to save his vision. While he eventually returned to baseball, Score was never the same dominant pitcher. His once promising Hall of Fame trajectory ended in a single brutal moment. Kevin Pillar provided one of the most disturbing visuals in recent baseball. On May 17, 2021, the New York Mets outfielder was batting against the Atlanta Braves when Jacob Webb's 94.5-mile-per-hour fastball struck him square in the face. The ball made direct contact with his nose, causing it to explode in a fountain of blood. KP immediately fell to his knees, blood pouring from his nose and mouth onto the field. Teammates and opposing players visibly recoiled in horror at the sight. Medical staff rushed to him as he remained on the ground, blood pooling around home plate. He suffered multiple nasal fractures, and his face swelled grotesquely within minutes. The broadcast cameras caught every disturbing detail. Incredibly, he brought out the lineup card the very next day, his face massively swollen and bruised, demonstrating remarkable toughness despite looking barely recognizable. J. A. Happ. J. A. Happ's skull fracture could have been fatal. On May 7, 2013, the Toronto Blue Jays pitcher was facing the Tampa Bay Rays when Desmond Jennings lined a ball directly into the left side of Happ's head with tremendous force. The sickening sound reverberated throughout the stadium. Happ immediately collapsed to the mound, clutching his head as blood began seeping through his fingers. The ball had struck him behind his left ear, fracturing his skull. Teammates surrounded him as medical staff rushed out, and Happ was placed on a stretcher and taken directly to the hospital. Doctors diagnosed a depressed skull fracture, an injury that could easily have resulted in brain damage or death. Remarkably, Happ did not suffer a concussion despite the skull fracture. The baseball community held its collective breath, remembering similar injuries that had ended careers or worse. Happ eventually returned to pitching after weeks of recovery. Mike Cameron and Carlos Beltran created a collision straight from horror films. On August 11, 2005, the New York Mets outfielders were both pursuing a fly ball in San Diego when they collided head-to-head at full speed. The impact produced a nauseating crack that silenced the entire stadium. Both players crumpled to the ground, motionless. Cameron suffered the worst damage, a broken nose and multiple fractures to both cheekbones, requiring immediate facial reconstruction surgery. Blood covered both players and the outfield grass. Beltran sustained a concussion and a fractured cheekbone. Teammates who rushed to help were visibly shaken by what they saw. The collision was so violent that some players turned away, unable to watch. Both men were stretchered off as concerned fans watched in stunned silence. Cameron's facial structure was so severely damaged that doctors had to essentially rebuild portions of his face. Jason Kendall's ankle injury remains one of baseball's most grotesque moments. On July 4, 1999, the Pittsburgh Pirates catcher attempted to beat out a bunt when his right foot struck first base awkwardly. Kendall took several more strides before his ankle completely gave out and he collapsed in agony. What made this injury especially horrific was the visible deformity. His ankle was fractured and dislocated with a piece of the fibula bone protruding several inches through his skin. Teammates who rushed to help immediately turned away in horror at the sight of bone jutting from Kendall's leg. The injury was so graphically disturbing that television broadcasts cut away from close-up shots. Medical staff worked frantically to stabilize the compound fracture as Kendall writhed in pain. The image of the bone sticking out became one of baseball's most nightmarish injury photographs, often compared to similar devastating injuries in football. Juan Encarnacion's career ended in the cruelest way imaginable. On August 31, 2007, the St. Louis Cardinals outfielder stood in the on-deck circle at Busch Stadium when a foul ball off teammate Aaron Miles's bat rocketed directly into his left eye at full velocity. The impact was catastrophic. The ball struck with such force that it shattered his eye socket and caused severe trauma to the optic nerve. Team physician Dr. George Patella described the injury as resembling the disintegration of an eggshell, with the orbital bones essentially exploding on impact. He was rushed to the hospital where doctors worked to save his vision, but the damage was too extensive. He never regained sight in that eye and never played professional baseball again. Bryce Fleury's face was destroyed in front of a national audience. On September 8, 2000, the Boston Red Sox pitcher was facing the New York Yankees when Ryan Thompson lined a ball directly into Fleury's face. The ball struck his orbital socket and cheekbone with devastating force, causing immediate catastrophic damage. Fleury collapsed as blood erupted from his shattered eye area, covering the mound. The sight was so graphic and disturbing that television broadcasters immediately cut away from close-up shots, unable to show viewers the full extent of the gore. Teammates rushed to Fleury, who was writhing on the ground, blood streaming from his face. He suffered multiple facial fractures, severe damage to his eye, and required extensive reconstructive surgery. The injury was career-altering as Flory struggled with vision problems and never regained his previous form. The horrifying image became one of baseball's most disturbing televised injuries. Steve Yeager. Steve Yeager's injury created a new piece of safety equipment. During a 1976 Los Angeles Dodgers game, Yeager was standing in the on-deck circle when Bill Russell's bat shattered and multiple sharp wooden shards flew directly into Yeager's throat. The fragments penetrated deep into his neck, lodging in his esophagus and surrounding tissue. Surgeons had to perform emergency surgery to carefully extract 9 separate pieces of wooden shrapnel from his throat, each fragment posing a risk of piercing vital arteries or his airway. The surgery was delicate and dangerous as one wrong move could have been fatal. Remarkably, Yeager survived and returned to playing. The horrifying nature of this freak accident directly led to the development of the protective throat guard extension that began hanging from catchers' masks. Even though modern-day professional catchers no longer have a hanging throat guard, this injury forever changed baseball safety equipment and potentially saved countless future injuries. Let me know in the comments which league to do next, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more gruesome injuries.